Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltiziak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. Welcome to another episode. In this special episode, I have the opportunity to speak with Detroit Lions beat reporter Justin Rogers. He's been on the job since 2011, folks. Formerly of MLive and the Detroit News, Justin is the founder of the Detroit Football Network. We're going to hear him offer insights on this franchise that he is uniquely qualified to answer. Plus, get his take on the current team and talk a little sports journalism as well. That and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
This is Jameer Gibbs, and you listen to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today from the Detroit Football Network is Detroit Lions beat writer Justin Rogers. Justin, thank you for joining the show today.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Matthew.
Now, before we get fully started, for some of the listeners, this might be their first time hearing about the Detroit Football Network. Can you share what it is and how it came to be?
Yeah. I've been covering this team now since 2011, so year 14, and I don't love throwing those numbers out because it kind of dates you, but I worked first for MLive and then ported over to the Detroit News for 7 years, and at some point, pretty late in 2023, while the Lions were making their playoff run, I started kind of pondering what the logistics look like of doing this on my own. Kind of felt like my earning potential in a industry that isn't doing great, newspaper, print media, and it's not just print, it's television and it's radio. I just didn't see a good way to advance, and so I consulted with some people and thought, I'm really confident in what I do, how I do it. The work ethic is there. The innovation has always been there. And I said, I think I can do this on my own. It's a conversation where you got to convince your wife. Didn't take long. She's always been really supportive of what I do. And so, I pulled the plug on the Detroit News and launched this 3 days later. And I was kind of laying the groundwork, for the months leading up. But in a lot of ways, I still do what I've always done. I cover the team as what I believe as thoroughly as everyone or anyone, or everyone in that case. But with a little bit more of a personal twist on top of that in terms of interacting with readers and really, really focusing on making sure that I'm giving them the angles that I know they want to read, and if I don't know, I'm listening to what they want to read. And so, just celebrated a year anniversary. Somewhere in the ballpark of 500 to 600 stories last year. Dipped my toes in the podcasting. Got in an ice bath with Dan Skipper. Just trying a lot of different things. But it's been a really good year, and that bet on myself has paid off in ways. Early ways that maybe I couldn't have even imagined.
That's awesome. I couldn't have lasted 2 minutes in that ice bath because I've like taken cold plunges in like May, and I give you credit. I know you had some burning on your lower extremities from being in there that long.
My feet still it's like psychological. Like I talk about it and I could still feel the burning on the bottom of the feet.
Well, again, it goes to show how tough these football players are that they can do that all the time. As someone who also has worked in mainstream sports media, I've seen a lot of change. There was a lot while I was in the industry, and there's been a lot since I've left it. And I think we're at a point where a lot is shifting. I love what you are doing. I think it's a great benefit to fans of the team because you get a lot more insight, a lot more personal angles on things. So keep up the great work. I'm excited to have you on here and get a little bit of your insight. Let's go back and tap into some of that historical perspective that you
Sure.
have. Schwartz, Caldwell, Patricia Campbell, you've covered them all. There was some success under Schwartz and Caldwell, but nothing like today. We'll just skip over the Patricia era. But tell me this, what do you think is the difference that's finally gotten the Lions to the level that they're at today that people have been waiting decades for?
Yeah, I've made this comparison before, and it's weird how cyclical, coaching hires go, and you hear it a lot. Like, yeah, you hire the guy that was the opposite of the last guy, right? And so there was a lot of overlap with the personalities and coaching styles of Jim Schwartz and Matt Patricia. Patricia took some of those things to the extreme, but just the way that they treated players, treated people in the building, had a harder edge to them. And there's also a pretty massive overlap to the Venn diagram of Jim Caldwell and Dan Campbell. Um, just far better at the personal level of managing people. And when I think you demonstrate that you care for your coaches and for your players and for the janitors in the building, like everybody just is a little bit more motivated to give those guys their all, on a day-to-day basis. Like you want to play for that man. You want to play hard for that man. Um, I would contend there was, Jim Caldwell got the most out of his roster a lot of the time. It wasn't perfect, but those rosters weren't as talent rich as I don't know if you heard that. That's my new kitten that's disrupting this whole thing. But
Nope, it's good.
yeah, those rosters were not as talent rich as the one today, right? And they still, made the playoffs twice. They had the 3-9 win seasons in our 9+ win seasons in 4 years. And so I still have a lot of respect and admiration for Jim Caldwell, the football coach, and Jim Caldwell, the even more so the manager of people. Um, Dan Campbell, like I said, has a lot of those same characteristics, but the difference is kind of Brad Holmes, right? Like if Jim Caldwell had Brad Holmes's drafting acumen, who knows what levels of success Jim Caldwell could have had, honestly. And so when you draft, some of the obvious ones of it, Panay Sewells and Aiden Hutchinson were great, but like when you also are mining great talent in day two and day three, led by Kirby Joseph and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Brian Branch, Sam Laporte. I mean, there's just so many Pro Bowl, all pro calibers and talents there. And look, the coaching staff is tapping in and maximizing that talent, but it really is kind of this perfect marriage of talent acquisition and a coaching staff that these guys want to play for, that they're able to maximize what they have. And it's not just Dan Campbell. I mean, he's put together a staff of acolytes, guys that played in the league like him, that connect with players in that way. And it's really been kind of the perfect marriage for this franchise.
All right, I love the depth of that answer, and yeah, Brad Holmes makes a lot of sense there with what he's done to help build this roster and work with Dan on that. All right, let's switch to the quarterback position. You covered Matthew Stafford in his early years through the end of his time with the Lions, and then you've got the transition to Jared Goff and the new regime taking over. I believe Goff and Stafford are probably the two best quarterbacks the Lions have had in the last 50 years, maybe going back to Bobby Lane.
No question.
All right, guys, make sure on the same page there. So let me ask you one thing. Does it surprise you that during both of their times in Detroit, when they haven't been perfect, because they both had growing pains at moments, they've gotten a bit of shade thrown at them in general? Does that surprise you or not really?
No, I think that's the nature of the quarterback position. We want to attach the success or failures of a football team to the quarterback because it's easiest. They touch the ball the most. It's where your eyes are trained. And in reality, I mean, a quarterback does have more to do with winning and losing than any other position. But if you have a lack of talent around you, it's tough to overcome that. A quarterback can't carry a 53-man roster alone. And so I always contended when Matthew Stafford was here that if the pieces were right around him, he could win a Super Bowl. He maybe was, if you put quarterbacks into tiers, I don't think Stafford was ever elite. He was never in that Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, current generation, your Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. Like Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford have never been in that conversation, and won't, frankly, because they're pocket passers, and this is an era now of dual threats. And so, um, but like I said, both those guys have proven that if you put the right pieces around them, they are capable enough to win a championship. Matthew Stafford, unfortunately, did it somewhere else, but look what the Rams did. They put a superstar team around him, and that's what it took. And the Lions during Stafford's era had different waves of things. They would have a good offensive line, or they'd have really good receivers. 2014, I believe, was one of the best defenses in the league. But there was always like something else missing. Imagine if Matthew Stafford had a Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery caliber run game. Like, it just would have looked totally different. That offense was already very good, and some of the errors, particularly under Linehan, but he never had superstar caliber running backs. So the threat of running backs, or the running game, the ground game, was never there. The defense most years was not good. And so there was almost only so much Stafford could do to carry it. Goff, I think walked in with a lot more skepticism. Understandable. The organization that drafted him number one overall was willing to give up on him for Matthew Stafford and pay quite a bit of draft equity along with that. So, like, doubt is natural at that point. His ability to manage the personal disappointment and embarrassment of that situation, to crawl out of that hole, to take command of this franchise, to lead them to heights they have not seen in the Super Bowl era, um, has been remarkable. And again, he's not an elite quarterback. He's a very good quarterback that can win a Super Bowl with the right pieces around him. The Lions are certainly in that conversation now with the right pieces around him. He got him to the doorstep in 2023, 2024. I would say, I don't know, if you did an approval rating poll, Goff would be pretty high. They chant his name everywhere. And I think fans have connected with his story of perseverance. It fits Detroit and the market so well.
I was there at that playoff game against the Rams. I mean, you see the picture
It was
over my
electric.
shoulder. It was incredible, and where the
Yeah.
Jared Goff chant started, and it was pretty incredible. Um, at this point in their careers, Stafford's a little bit older, a little bit more banged up. Do you see? I think you said it perfectly. They're both basically in the same category as far as being very good, not quite elite, knocking on that door, but they're not going to get there due to some of those attributes. Would you put them kind of equal, like one next to each other, as far as ability and talent and whatnot right now?
Yeah, I mean, right now I would take Goff strictly on age, durability, whatever. Careers, you stack them side by side. It's close. I think I probably would lean Stafford in a vacuum. Again, if you plug and play them at their prime with the same rosters, I just think Stafford's arm talent is maybe the separator. But no, I take nothing away from Jared Goff. He's accurate. He has improved his biggest deficiencies throughout his career, which I thought were he had this propensity for like one big poor decision a game, and that doesn't really exist anymore. Sure, does he throw some bad interceptions sometimes? Yeah. Did he throw a terrible one in the playoff game against Washington at the worst possible time? Yeah, but that's not the resume anymore. And I think I I would always say his deep ball accuracy wasn't great when he got here, and it's it's not elite, but it's adequate now. I don't think it's a deficiency by any means. And so you look at the numbers he posted last year, the greatest completion percentage, the greatest passer rating um, of any Lions quarterback in history, one of the lower interception rates of his career. He's just, we use game manager as like a negative, and it shouldn't be. Like, he manages the game as well as anybody in football right now, and that is a really, really valuable asset in modern NFL where passing the football is at a premium. It's replaced a chunk of the ground game, and it's certainly that short passing game. And he's accurate and efficient. Like, how do you knock that?
I concur with that. Well, let's stay with that position. But let's talk current, present day. Let's talk Hendon Hooker.
Sure.
You've seen two great quarterbacks mature in progress. Right up in person. What have you seen from Hendon since he's arrived in Detroit?
Yeah, didn't see anything his rookie year. He missed training camp. We don't watch full practices beyond camp, and so like the my impressions of Hendon once he returned mid-season as a rookie was him throwing at a net. One of the drills where they throw at the net with the little hole cutouts, and honestly, he wasn't very accurate during that stretch. And I know the Lions were pretty intent on rebuilding his mechanics from the ground up, and so like anything, you change a process, you got to rewire the brain, you've got to rebuild muscle memory. And his first full off season, it wasn't great. I mean, and I'm talking now last year. Processing wasn't great, held onto the ball far too long, far too often, even in 7-on-7 drills where he's got no pass rush. He's scrambling at times when there's the coverage is eating up his first and second reads. Then he suffers the thumb injury, breaks his thumb. I think pretty sure I broke the news on that. And that's your thumb on your throwing hand, right? So your grip's affected, your accuracy is all over the place. He's playing through it, but it's clearly a mess on top of a mess with the mechanics being rebuilt. And he was good enough to win the backup job. He surged past Nate Sudfeld there at the end, but a very very average backup situation last year. Like if you threw him in there, you weren't gonna feel great about his ability to navigate the offense successfully for more than maybe a few drives. You really didn't want him starting multiple games. And there's a reason Teddy was brought back for the playoffs. Like Hendon just wasn't quite ready. This offseason, he's looked like a different guy. And I can't say that enough. And I know that most fans, their exposure to him was the preseason game, and that went poorly. There's no other way to put it. It was a really showing for him. Practice field, the accuracy is way up. The zip on the ball is fantastic. The processing is vastly, vastly improved. There are times where he still holds on the ball too long, but that it has trimmed way, way down. And so I feel really good about where he's at in his development. I think Kyle Allen is doing a nice job pushing him. A veteran that's very efficient, knows how to distribute the ball, clearly has picked up the scheme quickly. But I take the preseason game, the second half, not entirely with a grain of salt, but I consider the context, right? He comes in, he's got the third string offensive line, he's got third string receivers, and so threw 6 passes while trailing by 3 scores. And so what do we really glean from that? It's not a whole lot. It's just not, and yeah, he was inaccurate and inefficient and, had one of those moments where the processing was off and he took off and scrambled when he didn't need to. But I'm taking the full body of work that I get to see that fans don't. And I can tell you without hesitation that this is a quarterback on an upward trajectory and looks like a capable and competent backup that if you have to slot him in there with the first team offense right now, he's not going to be Jared Goff, but you can survive for a start or two with Hendon Hooker if needed.
Well, that's some encouraging news there because I've maintained, other than the Teddy Bridgewater year, the Lions haven't had a real backup quarterback. No offense to anybody that's held that position, but they haven't had one that you felt could win a game since Sean Hill. And I'm not just saying that because he's a Maryland Terrapin, but when he was in there, you at least felt like there was a chance to win. Sure. Otherwise, anytime Stafford went down, you're like, okay, we have no chance of winning once Sean Hill was gone, and kind of same with Jared Goff early years.
I think that's probably true for 28 NFL teams. I think that's kind of the point I always drive home with backups is there are like 3 or 4 guys that you're confident that they could win. It's like the Joe Flacco of recent years or the Gardner Minshew. Ryan Fitzpatrick to me was like the quintessential backup. Like guys that actually would start on bad teams, right? And what do those guys cost? And in most instances, it's between $5 and $10 million a year. And so when your starter is making 50 million a year, as a franchise, you can't afford to tie up an additional 5 to 10 million to the backup quarter position. You have to find other ways to make that position work. And the answer is you draft and develop somebody. And look at the history of drafting and developing quarterbacks in this league beyond the first round and even the first round, right? Like it's so hard to find a guy. So I thought Holmes and company took a very smart approach. They took a they got a discounted price tag on Hendon Hooker for both the injury and his age. Teams didn't want to wait for a guy to recover and come out and be 39 for his third year, right? But that was a smart approach. You got a cheap option with a high ceiling. I mean, that was a guy that I watched a little bit of Tennessee football that year. Like I understand some of the schematic adjustments he was going to have to make at this level, but he ran that offense with such great efficiency and really was, in my opinion, the Heisman front runner when he went down. And so, that's how you do it in the NFL. Like if you've got a $50 million starter, you better find $1 million backup. And it looks like it took a couple years for it to come together, but I think that future has arrived. And who knows? Maybe they're gonna have to do it again in 2 years with Hendon only having 2 years left on the contract.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to keep an eye on as well. Well, the offense is going to look a little different. We've got John Morton as the offensive coordinator. I think one of the biggest changes people have noticed from that first preseason game is he's up in the booth versus being down on the sideline. Now, he's not the only one that does that. There's a handful around the league that
Sure.
do that. But Ben Johnson was on the sideline. How does that change things? Or does it? I mean, it changes it, but does it matter?
I don't think it really matters. I think you want a coach to feel just like a player, right? You want a coach to be the most comfortable in his element, and if he feels like he processes the game better from that bird's eye view, that's where you want him. The communication isn't going to be a whole lot different. Um, it's still going to be Brunell kind of working through the stills on the sideline, but there's communication through the headsets and he can convey whatever message he needs. He's still going to be the voice in Goff's ear up until 15 seconds are left on the play clock. And so it also helps that Goff is who he is, right? Like he's got a ton of experience. He's got a ton of experience in this offense. Even if that headset went out, he could run the offense fine. He knows the goals, the objectives, the intent of the plays when they're run. So, I am not concerned about Morton in the booth. I'm, like everyone else, more concerned about the offensive line, right? Like that's all the other pieces are the same or slightly better. But you're going to have a very young offensive line. You're taking the strength of the offense, the engine of the offense, as Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell have called it, and you've overhauled that engine. And there's a lot of unknowns with how well Graham Glasgow will bounce back. It looks good in practice, but it's a little bit different. But more than that, it's the inexperience of the two guys on his shoulder. I think Christian Mahogany has been one of the 5 to 10 best players in training camp. I mean, just every single day, he stands out with his consistency and his execution. I think Christian Mahogany is going to be another one of those Brad Holmes picks that just ends up being a super steal, if you will. Um, Ratledge is a wild card, and I'm sure he's going to be a good player. I think he deserved to be drafted where he was. Um, his college tape, he went up against all kinds of ultra talented NFL caliber defensive linemen, and his pass protection I thought was his advanced skill. And that's going to be really important because you want to make sure Goff's pocket is protected because that's where he's at his best is operating out of a clean pocket. But the chemistry of the whole group is going to take some time to develop, and that I think that is where the success of this unit is going to hinge in 2025.
That makes a lot of sense. And Mahogany, a sixth round pick,
Yeah.
starter in year two is exactly another one of those incredible steals. It's looking like that. So obviously the offensive line is going to be a key element. Let's flip over to the other side, the defensive line, another element that people are talking about. All offseason, everybody wanted more depth on the defensive end. Marcus Davenport looks more than solid, but the big thing about him is his health.
Yep.
How are you feeling on the defensive line? And do you feel like they need to bring another guy in for depth on the defensive line, or you think they're okay?
I think you roll with what you have right now. You know Zadarius is sitting out there. And I'm convinced. I don't have it on any good authority, but just I've seen it enough. I'm convinced the Judon stuff was floated out there with intent to make sure that Zadarius knows like this is the price we're willing to pay. He was set to earn 11 mil this year before the Lions let him go. I was told that they offered him in the ballpark of 5 to stay, and he passed on that. And then they were able to get Davenport and Muhammad back for that price. And so, that was plan B for them. And I think they feel good about plan B. Marcus Davenport, I would say, looks better than good. He's looked almost great as a compliment to Hutchinson. I mean, they pair so well, their skill sets together. Um, the the durability point is valid. You have to see it to believe it, and um, you know, if that goes south, I think, like I said, I think Zadarius Smith sitting out there is something that maybe gives you a little bit of confidence because he wants to be here, and I think he's willing to wait for that to develop. A little bit more concerned about Pascal right now. We don't know exactly what he's dealing with, but I'm guessing he probably doesn't take the field for the first time until October. Hassanin is kind of that fourth guy right now. Keith Cooper, undrafted rookies, kind of in that mix. I understand why neither one of those guys inspire the confidence that an accomplished veteran like Zadarius Smith does, but you're talking 15, 20 snaps a game. I think you can survive it. Defensive tackle, same thing. It's Aleem McNeil's out. That's a tough injury. Levi going out is a tougher injury. I don't think they have a great pass rushing defensive tackle right now. It's certainly something that lacks. DJ Reader's looking great. Tyleik Williams had his best practice, I think, as a Lion yesterday. But again, neither one of those guys are speed guys, right? They're not going to get an edge on a guard. They might push the pocket because they're so big and powerful, but I think they lack a traditional three technique, and you're not going to find a good one off the street right now. So, assuming Pat O'Connor comes fine out of his little injury scare yesterday, like that's the guy. Like that's the guy that is the next man up that stands to benefit, that could be important to them on some of those pass rushing downs, or you're going to be sliding Davenport and sliding Aiden inside on third down and hoping to generate the rush that way.
All right. Well, one last Lions question before we finish up with a couple of sports journalism questions here. The Lions had new heights last year, 15-win regular season.
Yeah.
Do you have an NFC North standings prediction or expectation or kind of idea of how you think it's all going to go down?
Yeah, I don't think it changes a whole lot. Just based on the offseason moves, I still think the Lions are the team to beat. That they're the biggest changes are the coordinators, and I'm not worried about the defense at all. I think there's too much talent on the offense for John Morton to screw it up. I mean, it's not a John Morton thing. Like I think a capable and competent coach with that much talent, it's a tough offense to screw up. And so, I don't know how many wins that looks like. I don't think it's 15 again with this schedule, but is it 11 or 12? And they're kind of in the same ballpark of as good, probably. And so, that leaves the rest of the division chasing. Packers probably two for me. Bears and Vikings. I mean, it really just depends on how quickly things gel for them. And for the Bears, obviously, it's Ben Johnson's scheme and how quickly can, they've got a bunch of new pieces on their offensive line as well. Like how quickly can that come together? Because I think the defense is going to be pretty good, particularly with Dennis Allen as the coordinator. I think Chicago's going to upset some people this year, and if if Ben's offense takes hold and Caleb, really clicks with him, they could push for a playoff spot. I really believe that. And then Minnesota, it's the quarterback position, and we know how good Kevin O'Connell is. He is like if QB whisperer is a real thing, like Kevin O'Connell is that. He just the Sam Darnold stuff last year really exemplifies that. And so you get JJ McCarthy back there. You don't know what it is until you see it on the field, but um, I have a lot of confidence in O'Connell. So it's going to be a really competitive, tough division. I think they're going to beat each other up throughout the year, but I still think Detroit is holding down the fort as the class of the NFC North.
All right. Well, let's finish by talking a little sports journalism for a minute. Let's talk about a journalist specifically, Tom Kowalski. For the younger audience who might not remember, Tom the Killer Kowalski, he was the Detroit Lions beat writer starting in the late 1970s, all the way up until his untimely death in 2011. And to me, he was always the gold standard. Like probably many others thought that way. His articles, his interviews were just always top notch. He passed away in 2011 unexpectedly at the age of 51. Justin, you actually had the opportunity to work with Tom early in your
Yeah.
career, I believe it was. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
Tom was a force of nature. Um, and I agree. Like I'll go back even further. Like I read Tom growing up, and I loved telling the story to him. The Oakland Press used to do a pick'em contest where you'd go against Kowalski's picks, and you'd use your touchtone phone to pick the team against the spread. And I don't know, 9 years old, ten years old, and not eligible for the contest, but I would call and I'd enter it in and then plug in my mom's name. And yeah, 9-year-old me beat Tom Kowalski and won a pack of Kowalski sausages delivered to the house. So really, really good memory to kickstart my sports journalism career. Uh, when I worked at MLive, I wore a lot of unique hats early because I took kind of a backdoor into the industry. And one of those roles was I spent a lot of time with the beat writers, kind of helping them understand the transition from print journalism to online journalism and about learning about how to post things online with urgency when there was breaking news. Um, maybe how to have a little bit more of a personal blog like voice for things that were online exclusive. And um, nobody understood the evolution of where this industry was going quite like Tom, at least with the people I worked with. And you have to understand, I mean, it's human nature, right? We're all conservative and reluctant to change the things that we do, the processes, the way we do them. And I think it's probably even more true for journalists. Like they just get so set in their ways. Um, I feel very fortunate. I use the line from the Batman movie with Bane, where he says, you merely adopted the darkness. I was born in it. Like I was born, my journalism crew was born in this era of online journalism and wearing multiple hats and being able to produce multimedia. Like I feel very fortunate that, I was trained to be nimble from the start. Tom's adaptability never ceased to amaze me. And he did a perfect job of melding hard-nosed factual reporting with personality. And that's really tough to do because as journalists, we're not the story. The topic we're covering is a story, and we're careful not to make ourselves part of the story because that's not what the job is. But Tom's personality was so big and people wanted Tom, right? Like in some level, for Lions fans, he was why they tuned in. And so he found ways to incorporate his personality into coverage. And as we gave him that leeway to have more online, to express more opinion, to be more first person in what he did. I mean, he was doing mailbags and he was on. It's weird to think because it doesn't seem like it's that old, but he was on Twitter and he was on Twitter right away. Like we got him an account and told him how it worked, and everything we taught him, like he just got it. He asked the right questions and then he just did it. And Tom's work ethic was relentless. And, he was an intense person to work with. Like this is a large, imposing man. I don't know why. It's like a WWE measurements now. Like I've made him probably bigger than he was in real life, but like 6'6", 300 pounds, like just a very imposing man. And he would use that kind of to bully you. And I don't say that in like a mean way, but like he would test you. Like, can you stand up to me? Can you stand on your own? And he pushed me as a young journalist, and there was points where I had to push back, and you knew when those moments were done, like you gained his respect and you moved, up a peg in his eyes. And so he made me better at my job early. We had a great working relationship, a lot of banter. I was very much in a supplemental role. And then when he passed, um, I kind of was moved temporarily into like an interim role of replacing him because it was during training camp. Like we needed somebody on the ground immediately. And so that was really my first foray into covering the Lions, full time outside of maybe a few random days out there shooting photos or maybe writing a single story and go from 0 to 100 really quickly. And I've made it very clear from the start. Like I never tried to be Tom. I couldn't. I couldn't. I don't have his personality. I don't like I'm much more subdued and laid back and but I've always tried to match his work ethic. I've always tried to take the approach that I'm going to inform the audience better than everyone else. And I do try to innovate and evolve and always think forward. And so I try my best to carry forward his legacy without trying to fill his shoes because it's impossible. It just is. But it's really easy to remember what Tom meant to me, and it's even easier when you walk into the media room in Allen Park every day, and that signs on the door, Tom Kowalsski Media Room. Like nobody that worked with him will ever forget him.
That's awesome. I saw the media room this summer when I took a tour of it unexpectedly, and I was like, oh, wow, this is cool. Because like you, I was a fan of Tom's growing up before I even got into the industry. And then I met him outside Comerica Park one summer, and you are right about his size. I did not realize how big he was. And he was super polite and kind and took a photo with me and stuff. And yeah, so I really appreciate you sharing those insights because, yeah, he was again, I guess I call it the gold standard. He's what
No doubt.
everybody looked to.
There's a reason he's in the Hall of Fame. I mean, truly.
Yeah.
There's one media member that goes into the Hall of Fame every year, frequently they're retired, and he was put in, I think, that first year posthumously. Like, yeah, it seems like such an easy decision, but he wasn't just appreciated locally. I think there was a national understanding of how good he was at his job.
Yeah, and I believe it was that very first year, every Lions road game, wherever they went, they left a spot open for where Tom would be. And so at every stadium. So that was pretty cool too. Justin, any other Detroit Lions insights that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to share before we get out of here?
Oh, that is too broad a question for me to I have no idea where to even go with that. So I'm gonna pass on this occasion. I'm sure there are a million things, but nothing jumps out.
Awesome. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate these insights and the conversation.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Again, a big thank you to Justin Rogers from the Detroit Football Network. I highly recommend you give a moment of your time and check out his work. It could be a game changer. He's also part of a new podcast that's going to be launching, so make sure you look out for that. Folks, thank you for tuning in. Please tell your friends and family about this show. Again, you can find us on most major streaming platforms, including YouTube. Please comment, subscribe, like the videos. For more content and episodes, go to notsothesameoldlions.com. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.